Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 33rd presidential election in American history took place on November 7th, 1916. Over in Europe, it pretty much seemed like the end of the world, quite literally. The entire continent was destroying itself. Millions were mobilized and millions were dying in what later became known as World War I. I have a song about World War I, of course. How horrifying was World War I? Well, I strongly recommend the Great War YouTube channel to get the specific details. But to give you a sample, the Battle of Verdun, which was still going on by Election Day, had been going on since February with no end in sight. Just in this one battle, hundreds of thousands of soldiers had died. This was a new kind of war, one with industrialized weapons that could cause massive destruction, and one that simply the majority of Americans didn't want anything to do with. Still, Americans had good reasons for not being too happy with the Germans. After a British ocean liner carrying Americans called the Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine the previous year, many had called for some kind of action against the Germans. At the same time, the Mexican Revolution was happening to the south, and people didn't know what was going to happen with their government there. It was truly a scary time, but most Americans felt the United States should just stay neutral with foreign affairs. Let's just mind our own business, all right? President Woodrow Wilson had kept the country neutral and ran for re-election with the overwhelming support of the Democratic Party. Wilson and Vice President Thomas Marshall were easily renominated. The Democrats built their entire campaign around the slogan, "He kept us out of war," scaring people into thinking that the Republicans would get the country in a war with both Germany and Mexico. After suffering their worst presidential defeat in history in 1912, the Republicans tried to rebound and heal the division that had caused the progressives to leave. They went with the moderate and uncontroversial Charles Evans Hughes, who hadn't spoken publicly about political issues in 6 years because he was a Supreme Court justice. Hughes was the only Supreme Court justice to ever be nominated for president by a major political party. The Republicans nominated former Vice President Charles Fairbanks as his running mate, another safe choice. The Progressive Party tried to renominate Theodore Roosevelt, but he turned it down, saying he didn't want to throw the election again to the Democrats. Because Roosevelt now just really wanted to see Wilson out of there, he endorsed Hughes, and many progressives followed his lead. This left the Progressive Party in a bit of a mess, and they simply did not recover from this. Meanwhile, the Socialist Party had to find someone else to run this time, as Eugene Debs was running for Congress instead this election. The Socialists nominated Alan Benson, a newspaper editor from Michigan, with George Ross Kirkpatrick, a political activist and writer from New Jersey, as his running mate. Both Benson and Kirkpatrick were very outspoken about getting involved with the war. In fact, they argued that all citizens should be able to vote by referendum whether to go to war or not. The Prohibition Party nominated Frank Hanley, the former governor of Indiana, with Ira Landreth, a minister and activist from Tennessee, as his running mate. Foreign policy dominated all of the campaigns. Wilson's people tried to promote the idea that he was the peace candidate, despite the fact that Wilson had sent troops to intervene in the Mexican Civil War. Hughes just wanted the United States to be more ready to fight in case they had to. And here are the results. Woodrow Wilson won re-election, becoming the first Democrat to win 2 consecutive presidential elections since Andrew Jackson. It was pretty close, though. The electoral vote was one of the closest in American history. Wilson received 277 electoral votes, and Hughes received 254. In fact, this election was not called for several days because everyone was waiting on California to deliver their results. Wilson won California, but only by 3,800 votes. He got a solid 49.2% of the popular vote, though, and Hughes finished with 46.1%. In third place, Alan Benson got 3.2% of the popular vote, and in fourth place, Frank Hanley with 1.2%. Hughes probably lost the election because he failed to get all of the progressives to come back to the Republican Party. Many still stubbornly refused. Wilson won 200 counties that had never never voted Democratic in a two-party contest prior to this election. While things were looking up for the Democrats, they were not looking good for Wilson's promise for keeping the country out of war, as we will see in the next episode.
Someday you left behind a
I'll see you for the next election, buddy.
broken down. You'd bring me flowers and stay for hours with me alone.